Um, so with that, I would love to introduce our first guest speaker. Leslie Bellingham is the Director of Partnerships for Raising the Roof. She has spent the most of her career in the nonprofit sector, running successful fundraising campaigns and raising awareness around and participation for poverty reduction programs. Leslie is passionate about her work with Raising the Roof, which is providing real solutions to preventing and ending homelessness through affordable housing and employment opportunities with wraparound support. When she's not working to end homelessness in Canada, you can find Leslie spending time with her family or volunteering in the local community initiative in Niagara. A big welcome to Leslie, and thank you so much for agreeing to be here with us today. I'll pass it over to you.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. So I have a little presentation here that I'm going to see if I can get up. Are you able to see this on my screen here? Okay. All right, then let me see if I can actually share this better. Okay, there we go. Like Mallory said, I'm from Raising the Roof. My name's Leslie, and I want to talk to you about kind of what Raising the Roof is. You may be familiar with our Toque campaign. It's what we're most famous for. We are in the middle of it right now, really. So you might see some TV ads and billboards and things like that, or Toques for sale places that have this little symbol that's on the screen here next to our logo with the little house. So that's really a fundraising campaign that we do for our organizations, initiatives, and also other partner agencies across the Canada that are all working to prevent and end homelessness in their community. So that's what we're kind of famous for. But what we've kind of done internally over the last 25 years, it's been a lot of research into how to actually prevent someone from becoming homeless in the first place. That's really our main focus, is prevention rather than emergency support. And also starting several really innovative pilot projects. So coming out of that research, having some model, maybe it's been done in another area or a different country, and how can we adapt that for here and implement it here, or something just totally new. So many different things, like working with youth in high schools, for example, to identify youth at risk of homelessness, and being able to work with them at that point before they actually become homeless. Just make sure, is my screen still showing? I just got a message on mine. Okay, that's really strange. It's just a message saying that sharing is stopped. So just want to check. So we did all these different pilot projects. Usually what we do is we would start the pilot project, test it out. Usually they were very successful, and then we'd pass it off to another organization so that we could kind of move on to the next innovative idea. But one of them was really so successful and so holistic that we kept it internally. And that's our Reside program. So what Reside is, let's see if I can. So what Reside is, it's 3 parts. It really has to do with affordable housing and employment opportunities, like Mallory mentioned. So first of all, because definitely our research showed that 2 of the best ways, or really 3 of the best ways, is to prevent someone from becoming homeless, is affordable housing and employment support and connections with wraparound supports for both of those. So what we're doing now with Reside, our main initiative, is acquiring or identifying vacant properties that could be better used for affordable housing for people who are experiencing homelessness or who are at risk of homelessness. And one thing that we realized pretty quickly when looking at these vacant properties, when we started this a few years ago, was that they usually need a lot of work. That's usually the reason why they are vacant. And because of that, it's actually a really great opportunity to give hands-on trades training experience to people who with barriers to employment in the trades. So all of that work that really usually kind of leaks out of affordable housing, that we want to capture that and really have that as that employment experience. So we partner with social enterprise contractors that already have construction training programs. And usually with these programs, what they really need is real life projects to work on, that you can only teach somebody so much in a workshop or in a classroom in the trades. What you really need is real life experience. So that's what these projects really provide, that kind of real life experience, working on a large scale renovation project, a large scale construction project. And that's really what employers value too, right? To be able to say that I have this person, they've been working with us for the last 6 months, here's some of the trades experience they've got, here are some of even the classroom experience they have, and they've been working really hard and they've done this project, and it's been extremely successful in connecting people with jobs in the trades or apprenticeships. About 85% of the people who work on the renovations go on to either a paid apprenticeship or full-time employment in the trades. It's an industry that is hiring. They're desperately in need of more workers. It's been pretty pandemic proof. It's essential services. It's been still continuing to hire and employ people. They had very little shutdown during the last 2 years. So it's really an amazing sector to be in. Definitely some lower barriers to entry too. Like you don't need a 4-year university degree or 6 years or anything like that to be able to get into it. You can get into a paid apprenticeship really with some support it's something that is, and it lends itself well to entrepreneurship and all of these things. So it's really is a great industry to be in. So that's a big focus. And then once the properties are actually complete, we work with local housing providers to identify the people most in need of housing in that community, help them to move in, provide the tenants with ongoing support. So we're not just creating these beautiful homes and then leaving people, but making sure the tenants are really fully supported as well. We are a national organization, and so we are doing these and have prospective projects all over the country. Here's some of the social enterprise contractors that we work with. So we are part of a network called Encompass. We have had a lot of projects in Ontario, but we're working on some others in other provinces now and upcoming in the future. And it's just been a really great way of really strengthening these social enterprises, helping them to grow, and even in one I'll show you in a minute, even really launching new ones. So I don't know if you can really see this with all the kind of faces on the screen, but this is Melissa. I'll just give you an example of somebody who did.
Sorry, Leslie, I don't mean to interrupt, but your slides didn't seem to advance.
Oh.
So I wasn't sure if I had missed it, but I just see somebody else had mentioned. So I don't know if you want to stop sharing, then maybe retry and pull it up again.
Sure. Let's see. Okay, let's try this.
Perfect. That's great.
See Melissa there? All right, great. So this is Melissa. So this is somebody who worked on some of our Reside projects. So she had spent about 7 years in a correctional facility. It was when she was in her halfway house after she left there that she heard about the construction training program. She was a little intimidated being a woman and getting into the trades, but she really, she loves working with her hands, and it was something that she really did want to get into and knew about the great opportunities. And so she started with building up, and she started working on one of our first projects, which was a heritage church in Caledon. And she started working on that project and some other building up projects as well. And she got that hands-on experience in classroom and really holistic support with the caseworkers at Building Up. Building Up is the GTA social enterprise contractor we work with. And then she also, she went off for a bit, then she came back. She worked on our latest Reside project in downtown Toronto. And now she's a finished carpenter and has working on some large scale other projects. She does sometimes come back and train and help other people, and is really a peer support worker for us in Building Up, and also for some other organizations. Like, it's been very, she's an amazing person, and has been so encouraging, especially to other women who are in similar circumstances to her, about how you can succeed in the trades, and there's support available. And she's been such an encouragement to other women, especially who maybe feel like intimidated about getting into the trades, even though they'd like to. And so she's been very fantastic kind of support to other women, and even been gone back to gone into prisons and other places too, to reach out to women there and to tell them that this is available, and they can get into. And honestly too, for a few women tell me this, like, especially if you do like have children or things like that, like for like single moms or things, that the trades can be a great position because it's not usually nights, especially if you're an entrepreneur, you have your own business, you can set your own hours. So it's, kind of actually a particularly can be family friendly type thing, and particularly good for single moms to get into. So this is one of our last project that we just finished, to give an example of what it looks like. So this is a single family home in downtown Toronto. It was owned by Toronto Community Housing, but it sat vacant for several years, and it had been deemed uninhabitable. We bought it from the city at a deep discount and started renovating it, really completely gutted the place. As you can see from the pictures, we did a lot of my dad. One second.
That is what we get with virtual working families in your home. Dogs need to go out anytime.
There we go. That's better. So we did a lot of greening on this too. One of a big focus of ours is trying to make the houses as sustainable as possible for the health of the tenants and the environment. And so you can see that, like in Tello in that picture, that's some of the latest technology, which is really great also to train the trainees on. So they're really being trained to be the future of construction, and in some of the latest technology kind of sustainable measures. And it was really successful too afterwards. When we had our energy model afterwards, the person who did the energy model said it was the tightest home they've ever seen. So we were really proud of that. And that will really, obviously contribute to the long-term affordability of the home as well. So it's complete now. A family of 6 has moved into the home. They are refugees, and they fled violence in their country. They were living in an emergency refugee shelter in Toronto, and now they have this, permanent. We don't want to create kind of emergency short-term housing. So they're always like, our focus is either long-term or kind of semi-long-term transitional housing, without really kind of a short-term end date. So they're going to be living there for the foreseeable future. HOT is the group that's supporting the tenants. They have a lot of settlement experience and have been working in this particular neighborhood in Toronto for, I think, 30 years. So they know the local resources, they know the supports, and so they're going to be able to be kind of helping the family get really established and settled in Canada. Some of the other upcoming projects that we have are in Winnipeg. We're really excited. It's our first one outside of Ontario that we're doing. This one was an abandoned nail salon that we were looking for, really a project that could be larger. We try to do the type of housing that the community tells us is most needed. So there was a Winnipeg Boldness project. It was an Indigenous-led group that was really looking at some of the needs in the community, and they said they really needed larger family-sized units for families with children. So because of that, it took us a while to find it, but we finally found this place that we're going to make the first floor into a 3-bedroom apartment, and the second floor into a 4-bedroom apartment. And they're going to be made available to families, and primarily Indigenous families. It's the most needed for sure in Winnipeg, kind of demographically, is the people most in need of housing. There's an Indigenous organization called Fearless that started 5 or 6 years ago that has a really unique, really family-based approach for supporting people. And so they are going to be the ones offering support to the tenants and kind of making those community connections. They're already working with families, so they know who's most in need of affordable housing, especially to keep their family together. There's a really high rate of child apprehension in this neighborhood. About 1 in 6 children are in foster care. So they have really said that this will be a real asset to the community, having more family-sized, affordable housing to be able to keep more families together. And the basement is actually going to be renovated into 1-bedroom apartment that's going to be made available to youth who are aging out of care, that are really, at risk of homelessness in that situation. And about 35 people we estimate will be trained and employed by Purpose Construction, which is social enterprise contractor in Winnipeg. Another one, kind of a larger project. So some of them are been small, like those first 2 I mentioned. This one is a larger project coming up. This one is going to be the redevelopment of the 2nd floor of this commercial building. And it's vacant now. It's been vacant so long. There are ashtrays bolted to the wall, and it hasn't been used from that was a time when you're smoking so much in your office you needed an ashtray sitting there. That's how long it's been vacant for. So we're going to be renovating the 2nd floor into 20 units of housing and adding a 3rd floor for a total of 40 units, and at least 24 of them will be made available to women who've experienced domestic violence and their children. Because definitely in that community, that's what they also told us was the most needed, that there was a lot of, there's a lot of women in shelters that are safe now, but they don't have anywhere to go next. So we wanted to be able to kind of create those units. And also we are intentionally having it to be a mixed building where there's market rent and affordable rent with supports to avoid stigma or safety issues at the building that nobody really knows. All the units will be the same, but it won't necessarily have to, to know that if you live in that building that, you've experienced domestic violence. There are some local organizations, Redwood Park Communities and the Lighthouse. The Lighthouse is really very local to Aurelia. They have been supporting people in this community for decades. Redwood Park Communities are in Barrie, the neighboring community to Aurelia, but they have a lot of experience supporting women with that kind of next step housing after the shelter. So they've been doing that for several years with really great success in being able to support women in that situation. So they're going to together work to be the support to the women who live in this building. And as you can imagine, with all the work that goes into this, it's going to be a lot of training opportunity. We're conservatively estimating 50 people will have a chance for really extensive training on this building. And another one in Sudbury, this one is a kind of a scattered site of 5 single-family homes. They're going to be renovated into 2 units each, which will be housing for at least 25 people, plus another 35 people being trained. And one thing that is really interesting about this one is that there wasn't a social enterprise already that was training people in this community, but because we have all of this work, this is going to be an opportunity to launch one. So Community Builders is the group in Barrie that does the training there and is going to do the Aurelia project, but they're going to be launching, or they have already launched, a new division of Community Builders North, and they're going to be able to use this work as the main basis for starting a construction training program that's going to be able to train and employ people far after these initial 5 projects are completed. So we're really excited about that. They have a great team, a woman named Carly who has done this in past in Brandon, Manitoba. A similar program is heading this up, and she's from Sudbury. She was very happy to move back home with her near her family and head this up there. So that's very exciting to see. One thing that's new to us is that as we have been doing these projects, we found that there's been different people reaching out to us that they have either property themselves or maybe even know about other property in their community that could be developed into more affordable housing. It could be used for these training opportunities, but they don't have the in-house expertise to be able to take on a project like this. So we've started to offer development management services. So really doing the whole gamut of the development process for people who would like to, say, for example, there's a women's shelter in Orangeville that has a larger building. There's opportunity to renovate part of it into more permanent housing units. But yeah, they just didn't have anyone, in-house experience doing this. They're experienced in running a women's shelter and supporting women, not so much in the construction management. So we're able to partner with them on this and kind of offer our services to them and do all of that, the site plan review with the city, rezoning applications, arranging for structural engineers and architects and all of that, as well as, overseeing the construction process. And so we're just starting to do that, but I definitely offer that if anybody, would be in that situation where you might want to redevelop your own property, or if you know of a property in town that might be good to be developed into more affordable housing units, but you don't feel like you could take on that project alone, that we would love to partner with you on that and work to see more affordable housing developed and to also try to incorporate that training into it. So that's my main presentation. I don't know, I wasn't timing myself. I think I might have gone a little bit long, but I'd be happy to take questions.
And Leslie, thank you. That was very informative, and it's actually really cool to see through the different stories that you told in different cities, the different applications of it. It seems like you focused on everything from single family homes to multi-unit buildings that can act as homes for multiple people. So it's very cool to see the kind of scope and reach of what your work is doing. Much appreciated for sharing those insights. If anybody has one, I think we might have one room for one more quick question. If there is anybody else, Bertie, feel free.
Well, if you think of something else later, then, please reach out to me. That on that raisingtheroof.org, you can find my contact information, and maybe I'll type it into the chat. Awesome.
Thank you, Leslie. The then I guess to pivot into the next group of speakers, it'll be really great to see another kind of emphasis on what multi-sectoral work can look like, but very cool to have Leslie and folks at Raising the Roof leading that kind of work, both in employment and housing, and bringing those goals together. So thank you. So the second group of speakers, we have three folks, Alyssa Klingbaum, Elvie Antonacci, and Lauren Parcher, who are part of the team working on Women Act Safe at Home project, which really aims to understand the policies, practices, and programs that support women to remain in their home or in independent housing when leaving violence. Alyssa is the research and policy coordinator at Women Act and leads our Safe at Home work, and Elvie and Lauren have been working with Women Act to mobilize the project's findings for different audiences, including at the Pan-Canadian Women's Housing Symposium and the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness Conference. I'm going to call it a concert. Maybe it could be that too. But I'll pass it over to you folks, and thanks so much for presenting.
Thanks, Mallory. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Are you able to see that? Okay, awesome. So thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon, and great to hear from you, Leslie, and about the Reside program. I know I was really interested to learn about that. So in terms of our presentation today, I'll start us off by talking a bit about what the Safe at Home housing model is and the research that we've done at Women Act to learn a bit more about it. And then Lauren, Elvie, and I are each going to present one research finding that really stood out to us from Women Act project and share some of our reflections or connections with the finding to give it a bit of context beyond the finding itself. And then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So to start us off here, what actually is a Safe at Home program? And I do want to emphasize, there isn't really one kind of program design or a universal definition of Safe at Home programs, but in our work at Women Act, we've been using this term to talk about housing programs that enable women experiencing violence to either remain in their current home with the perpetrator removed or to move directly to independent housing when they're leaving an abusive relationship. So we've got a bit of a visual here that I can walk you through to share some of what the intervention can look like in practice. So most Safe at Home programs use a combination of these features on the side here. So we've got legal tools, which are things like exclusion orders, protection orders, or evictions that work to remove or exclude the perpetrator from the home. Then there's multi-agency risk assessment, which is typically carried out on an ongoing basis to really assess if Safe at Home is an appropriate option for the survivor. And that can be based on things like the property features, the proximity to emergency responders, or some of the perpetrator characteristics like their location. Then there's home security measures. So these are, of course, things that physically secure the home against entry, and they can also include different types of safety devices that alert for an emergency response. And then the last two components are wraparound support services. So definitely for the survivor, but also in some program models for their partner as well. And this can involve things like service referrals, case management, or legal supports. And so all of these components and the different sectors that manage them are working together to reduce the risk of harm that's typically associated with separating from an abusive relationship and living independently right away. And so all of these pieces work together so that the survivor is able to maintain safe and stable housing. So one of the main reasons that Women Act has been really interested in the Safe at Home housing model is because it's already a core housing option for women experiencing violence in places like Australia and the United Kingdom. And we've got good evidence from these places that this housing model improves survivor safety and well-being. It can prevent homelessness, and it can reduce repeat incidents of intimate partner violence. But despite all of this, most of the housing options that we offer for women fleeing violence in Canada typically involve survivors being the ones to leave their homes and often moving through a number of precarious housing situations, including returning to that abusive situation. So as one part of our work to advance Safe at Home models in Canada, we carried out research with survivors of intimate partner violence to learn about their housing experiences and preferences at the time that they separated from an abusive relationship, and most importantly, what they thought about the Safe at Home housing model. So to do that, we conducted an online survey, interviews, and focus groups. And through that, we were able to gather some really important data about the types of housing that survivors typically access, and also lots of really great ideas about how a safe at home program could be designed in their own communities. So as I mentioned, we're each going to share one finding from that new research report, and we'll add some of the context behind that. So to start us off, I'll share my findings first. So one finding from this research that really stood out to me was about survivors as leaseholders in the homes that they shared with their partner or ex-partner. So most of the participants that we surveyed were living in private rentals when they were living with their partner. And among these renters, 78% reported that they were either the sole or joint leaseholder of the unit. So almost 8 in 10 survivors renting were listed on their lease. The first reason this finding really stood out to me was because, to be honest, I was quite surprised by it. We hear all of the time about the barriers that women face when they're not included on the lease. So it can affect their access to the unit, their entitlement to belongings in the unit, even how law enforcement or landlords will interact with the tenants of a unit. A lot of it comes back to that key question of who is on the lease. And so that was something we assumed would be a really big barrier for implementing safe at home programs. But this data might be telling us that more women have a legal right to their home than we maybe assumed going into this project. I also found this finding really surprising because it contrasted with what we were hearing from survivors about their housing pathways. So 80% of the survivors that we spoke to relocated when they separated from their relationship. And the majority of survivors reported that when they left their home, their partner was the one who actually stayed there. So this finding is telling us that we've got a bit of a disconnect going on here between who might be entitled to the housing according to the lease and then who is actually getting the opportunity to stay there at the end of a relationship. But to kind of end on a bit of a positive note around this finding, I think my overall reflection is that it can be a really good piece of evidence for advocating for safe at home programs, because even though being on the lease is definitely not everyone's experience when they're sharing a home with their ex-partner or partner, it does mean that a lot of survivors who are leaving home actually have a legal right to choose to remain in that home. So I think this is a really empowering finding for making safe at home a reality and helping survivors to be able to realize their right to housing. And I'll pass it over to Lauren to share the finding that stood out to her.
Thanks, Alyssa. So the finding that I'm going to focus on is that survivors reported that the Safe at Home programs would provide them with feelings of justice, security, stability, and comfort. So survivors discussed 2 strategies that strengthened their sense of safety over their home. One strategy was home security measures, so such as changing their locks, using a personal alarm device, and putting locks on their windows. The other strategy was changing the look of their home to help limit reminders and the impact of abuse. One survivor shared that staying in the home did feel empowering. I felt I was in control of my life because this was my home. I've seen a lot where women have been kicked out of their homes. So I thought, no, I'm not leaving my home. This is my home, just like this is my life, and I don't have to live it on someone else's terms. So although Safe at Home did provide feelings of justice and security, survivors did identify concerns around the justice system response. A few survivors discussed their hesitancy to contact police for safety as they felt the situation could be turned around on them. When police are responding to a domestic violence call, there is often a heavy focus on physical evidence. So for example, if an abuser has a scratch or a bruise from the survivor, the police may charge the survivor instead of determining the primary aggressor. The concern with the justice system response was also reflected in survivors' discussions around supports available. Survivors shared their concern around security features or legal orders being insufficient. So for example, a legal order may not prevent their partner from accessing the shared home or only covering the home location and not other locations in the community that the survivor may frequent. Survivors also identified issues with police response time and trust in police response. So these findings stress the importance for safe housing for survivors, because justice and security are not always provided by the justice system response. So although survivors identified their concerns with the justice system, there was a widespread interest in legal orders, case management, wraparound support services, and home security measures. Survivors also provided some suggestions that they believed would strengthen the justice system response, which included but wasn't limited to a partner being automatically relocated when convicted, easy access to no contact orders and restraining orders, a partner being legally required to wear monitored GPS tracking bracelets, stricter consequences for violating a restraining order or no contact order, and training for police on trauma-informed responses. So now I'm just going to pass it over to Elvie.
Thanks, Lauren. Hi there. So I'm going to talk about one of the more glaringly obvious key findings that jumped out from this report, to me anyways. I read it over and over, and you know, what I'm going to talk about is probably going to be really obvious to everyone, but I want to put the context and the comments and the data behind it. So when it comes to the safest, most practical and desirable option when separating from a relationship, 60% of survivors clearly told us that they would have been most likely to want to move to independent housing within the private market or within a housing program. Now, it's important to stress that this relocation to independent housing option was not at the top of the list in terms of one in which survivors felt that they could consider or could have access to at the time of separation. On the contrary, and as we're all painfully aware, very limited options are available. Sure, over 58% of participants did first access a housing option that involved relocation of some sort, but these were not desirable options and mostly interim or temporary landing pads, which involved going to an emergency shelter or staying with family or friends. I quote one respondent stating, "I was left with two options that didn't work, and I had to choose the lesser evil." So if we're going to relocate, we know that this could cause a little bit of disruption. So what are these disruptors? Well, over half of the survivors reported having a loss of control over their housing options. That's an obvious one. Many spoke about the major wait times, program eligibility difficulties, and access to only short-term supports. About half reported risk of harm and a threat to their safety, not to mention the trauma attached to staying in their previously shared home. And followed by many other various obvious disruptors to employment, family connections, social connections, financials, emotional well-being, accessing services and amenities, not to mention the hardship and impact that their children experienced. So now let's talk about what some suggested needs were, supports, and some possible solutions. Ideally speaking, and again, considering that the key finding that I'm talking about here was that 60% of respondents reported that moving to a new home is the best solution. And keeping in mind the above disruptors and safety concerns that participants provided, that these are just practical ideas. So number one was, let's think about having a case manager. You know, someone within the community that they could reach out to. This could be modeled similarly to the local health integration network or Children's Aid Society. When a senior or a child is in need, then a case manager is assigned to them. Why can't we have a case manager assigned to women experiencing domestic violence? This case manager would help organize, facilitate, and provide resources and supports to best meet the specific requirements that these survivors need: safety planning, financial resources, training, employment opportunities. These supports could obviously adapt as the independence increases. The next point that could be, you know, an obvious solution, and a lot about what Leslie was talking about, great initiatives, and you know, how do we get additional supply of community housing? Can we build on underutilized lands, or construct more infill on existing housing projects, increase the densities, build up, build out? Can we keep pushing for affordable inclusionary zoning within new construction projects within the private market with the developers? Can we convert underutilized properties? Perhaps we can set aside a unit or two within our existing housing communities for domestic violence victims. Can we reach out to the private market even and ask them to assist us? What kind of incentives, financial incentives and funding can we get from the government? I know everyone's asking the government for money, but we really need to push harder. Financial aid is clearly an issue and a need. We have funding support for the elderly and the disabled. We need more funding for these survivors. Ultimately, when considering this relocation to independent housing, ultimately, it is critical that in order to alleviate many of the disruptors that I just talked about, that the primary goal is to relocate these survivors within a central area, ideally within the same community, wherever practically possible. The benefits of living independently will ultimately restore feelings of control. Respondents told us about that they felt they would feel a sense of justice and stability. And to close, I quote one survivor that said, "Independent housing would have been heaven for me. I don't think I'd be worried about my safety and the kids' safety. And I find myself thinking in this roller coaster of trying to figure out so many things at once while I keep running into roadblocks." Thank you.
Thanks so much, Elvie and Lauren, and to everyone for listening. If you're interested in learning more about this research and reading through the full set of findings, and I see in the chat someone has asked, and thank you, Monica, so much for sharing the link to the reports. Everyone can feel free to check it out on the Women Act website, and there's lots more great information in there. And we're also very excited to be continuing with our Safe at Home project over the next 2 years. So we're now going to be taking this evidence that we have from survivors in this report here and starting to analyze some of the potential for actually implementing Safe at Home programs. So understanding more about the funding streams we would need to use, some of the policy barriers that exist and how we can address those, if there are capacity building needs across the different sectors that are involved, and even shifting some of the norms that we have around expecting women to leave home when they're looking for safety and how that's really reflected in our current approach to VAW housing. So if you're interested in staying connected with the work or getting involved with some of our future policy activities, Monica has also, thank you so much, added a link there in the chat where you can sign up for the Women Act mailing list, and there's a little tick box on there around the Safe at Home project, so we can keep in touch with any updates that are coming out of this work. Thanks so much, everyone, and I'll turn it back to you, Mallory.
Awesome. Thank you, Elvie, Lauren, and Alyssa. It was really great to hear from the three of you, the different perspectives and reflections you had and what your takeaways are from the research that survivors engaged in with you. So thank you all for sharing that. I'll open it up to questions if folks don't mind, again, raising your hand if you have a question for this group. Or if you have a question, you can put in the chat if you'd rather not come off microphone. And if there are no questions for this group, I'll also just say open it up in general to any of the speakers. If there's no specific ones for the Safe at Home folks, if anybody has any general questions that could apply to either groups of speakers, we're happy to take some full group questions as well. I'm seeing a lot of thanks for the great presentations in the chat.
This is, I'm just gonna go because I just
Go,
can't
Harmy, go
can't
for
hold
it.
it, can't hold it. This is so exciting. Oh my God. I'm so happy to see, and thank you for this presentation. I don't know if we could at all share a little bit, Alisa, about the next few years and what it may look like, because I do see a few really key stakeholders today, and it might spark some ideas at their own or within their own organizations. And also to say that Women Act is always happy and open to, have further conversations about partnerships. That idea that came up to you, and happy to always engage in dialogues that could potentially enhance any of our projects. So Alisa, I don't know again to what extent. I don't know if we're still under an embargo or what. I guess you would know more. But if there is anything further, it'll be awesome to just have a quick brief piece of information about that. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Army, so much. And I'm happy to share a bit more about that project. And I think as we start getting in touch with some stakeholders in the coming months, more details will probably become available, but definitely happy to talk a bit about what that will entail. So I think the first stage of the project will really be a policy and funding analysis. So as part of this first stage of the project, we learned a lot about the barriers that survivors experience when looking to access housing, but we also were able to speak with some service providers and some policy and program stakeholders as well, and hear about some of the policy opportunities and barriers that they brought forward in actually bringing this type of program into practice. And I think a big piece around that were two things: affordability and looking to how to secure the income that would be needed for survivors to access independent housing. And as well, the justice system piece was definitely a challenge brought forward, as Lauren spoke to so eloquently, around receiving some of those orders that would make this possible, and the strength and immediacy of those responses to make survivors feel safe in independent housing. So I think within that policy and funding research, we'll be looking to understand a bit more about what are the levers and opportunities through legislation, policies, programs to be able to better address some of those income concerns and some of those justice system responses, and thinking about a rights-based approach, a gender analysis on some of those pieces to really understand what needs to come together or what needs to change in order to make this a possibility. And then I think the other really big component of the next piece of work will be working with service providers and other stakeholders, particularly in the VAW sector, to really build capacity and shift some of the options that we currently have available in VAW housing. So to really think about what are actually the practical barriers to making this reality. If we've got that kind of funding and policy piece first, then what do we actually need on the ground to make people feel confident to administer this type of program, to feel like this fits into our current slate of housing options, and understand more about training, education, social norms, and that piece to actually bring sort of those two worlds together, the policy and the practice.
Thank you. And thanks for asking the question, Harmy. And thanks, Alyssa, for that really clear explanation. So if nobody has any other questions, I guess, the read I was getting from Leslie too, one of the beautiful things I think about all of the work that was shared today is that it is very much focused on A, the needs of community members and what they're asking for and looking for, and B, on working collaboratively within sectors, across sectors, with many individuals and groups. And so just a big nod of acknowledgement to all of the work that's happening in both of these spaces, and to the kind of approaches that you folks are taking. I think it all shows momentum and really strong understanding of what it is that people are looking for, and what we hope to see in the future and today. So thank you all for that, much appreciated. Leslie, if there's any listserv or anything that folks can stay in touch with Raising the Roof, please feel free to add it into the chat. I know you added your personal contact information there. In addition, Monica's going to share two things in the chat from Women Act. One is an upcoming webinar we have on March 1st. And this webinar is about senior women and the pandemic, looking at their economic security and safety. So we're going to have folks from across sectors really speaking to this timely and important issue, covering topics around isolation, engaging senior women with community services, and impacts to their economic well-being. And otherwise, if you want to stay in touch with the Women Act, or you want to stay connected to the organization, we are a membership organization. So the other link that Monica will share in the chat is just how to become a member with Women Act. So if you want to be involved in this advocacy work or any partnership work, or stay in touch with the upcoming webinars and education we offer, feel free to also follow through on that link if you're interested. Otherwise, we are like hitting it with ending 3 minutes early today. So I'm just going to say, take back those 3 minutes. Have a wonderful day. And thank you all so much for being here today. We really appreciate your presence and wishing you all well.